Hello, all, and welcome to a new episode of the Female Role Models podcast. Today, we will discuss a very cool topic, something that I'm very excited about. Today, we talk about emotional intelligence and how you can unlock your hidden potential. My next guest spent 12 years in investment banking before deciding to take a 3 years long journey to discover the value that she had to offer to the world that did not involve Excel and eventually launch her own company. She is an emotional intelligence expert who loves to shift paradigms through pitch perfect truth-telling. She specializes in facilitating fundamental transformation as well as cultivating these innate human skills in others through keynote speeches, EQ workshops, expedition-style intensives through her company, Adventure Awake, and one-on-one coaching. Without further ado, please welcome Antesa Jensen. Hello, Antesa, and welcome.
Hi.
How are you
Thank
today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy that we finally connected.
Yes.
We were just talking prior to starting the recording now that I've been following Antisa for a year and a bit, and I've been quite admiring her work. So today she's a guest in this podcast, and I hope that you will find it very interesting, guys, because I really think that what Antisa does in her daily life is very, very exciting. So just to give a bit of context, I saw Antisa at an event maybe a year and a half ago, and I was quite inspired by what she was telling on stage. She talked about finding your hidden potential, finding your, innate skills that you can continue to build on, something that you might have not necessarily thought of studying. And then she built her own company. She talked a bit about that. We will also touch upon that during this podcast. And then I saw her TED talk in Chicago last year. I was quite impressed by that. And then I also listened to another podcast she was on, the Today's Thought Leader. And I definitely invite you to listen to those as well, because it's something that will let you know more about Antisa. Antisa, how are you today?
I'm so wonderful and I'm so excited and you and I have kind of been pinging back and forth over the last year and a half after we met, and it just brings me delight that you have been influenced by what I've shared and that you want to share it with the people that you're also hoping to serve. So it feels like a really lovely ripple and I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you here as well. I want to start by going back to some of the intro words I've used. So you've sent me some information about you that I did not know before. I didn't know that you had such a long career in investment banking. So I would like, just before we go into that subject and how you shifted to a completely new domain, I would like to just tell people in 2, 3 sentences more about who Antisa is.
I guess an obvious one is I'm an American and I live in Denmark. I grew up in Seattle. I went to college in Oregon, which is the state just below Washington. And then I moved to New York City after I graduated college. And from when I was probably around maybe 12 to 14, I was very clear that I was supposed to live in Europe. I kind of felt like a displaced American. And I moved to Europe when I was 28, 29. And yeah, so I've been here for now 9.5 years. I'm in the process of applying for Danish citizenship. So let's hope that that works out.
Congrats. I saw that last week. You posted about it.
I'm really I'm excited for it. It's been a long time coming. It's a long process, as I'm sure you know. So that's one aspect of me, is that I'm an expat, and I see myself as a global citizen. I travel quite a bit. It's part of my business, which you mentioned, which was Adventure Awake, is to use the world as our mirror, quite literally. And so I really love to travel. This lockdown has been a really interesting experience, though I actually also really love to be at home and have spent a lot of time in my garden, and that's it. I travel a lot, I cook a lot, and those are just sort of random little things about me that are fun to know. And I'm an emotional intelligence expert. Wow, I can't even say the name of my title. I'm an emotional intelligence expert, and I teach this art. It's a beautiful art. I think it's a really important skill set in this era, and I feel very, very graced and blessed to get to be doing this work with other people because it's very transformative.
Hmm. Can you tell us more about what does it mean to be an emotional intelligence expert?
So I'm self-proclaimed emotional intelligence expert. So I just want to disclaim that it's mostly for LinkedIn actually that I started calling myself that because I think people Google that. But what my interpretation of it is that you have taken something that already innately exists in all of us, which is empathy. We all have empathy. Um, and you have attached skill to it. So it's your ability to communicate on behalf of your emotional experience. It's the literacy of your emotions, actually. It's your ability to actually discern what it is that you're feeling at a nuance level and also what you're feeling from other people. It's not just one way. So it's your ability to also sense a room, feel what's needed in a moment, and to be able to take action to follow up with it. So it's the integrity of and the literacy of empathy.
So you think everybody has the ability to sense the room, for example?
Yes, and of course there are those of us who, I think one of the main reasons why I'm so good at this is for two reasons. One is I am a musician, and I was born with perfect pitch. I have been a musician my entire life, and I've been very well trained as a musician up until I went to college. So that's one aspect of it. And I also grew up in a very, very dysfunctional, traumatic home where my survival relied on me being able to sense my environment. And so those two aspects have it be that I'm particularly skilled at it. And one could say I'm particularly skilled at it because one of my roles in this world, in this lifetime, is to teach the skill set to others because I can break it down in a way that people can understand. But I do believe that everyone is always responding to other people's energy. We're just not aware of it because it's not something that we're taught. It's not something that is prioritized in society or education. But we are always transmitting energy off of our bodies, and other people are always transmitting energy off of theirs, and we are always receiving it. There's a neuropeptide activity there that happens. And so it is scientific fact that we are receiving that information. We just may not be intellectually or cognitively recognizing it.
First of all, you've had, as some would say, and please correct me if you think it's wrong, you've had some pretty lucky occurrences. When you move to a new city and you find an accommodation in a day, you find a job in a matter of weeks, you find a new job in a new country as an expat with the work visa included in another day.
Yeah.
Those are some things that a lot of us or a lot of the listeners might feel, yeah, but this will not happen to us. And
Right.
I'm telling you this from my experiences with, for example, me being in Japan and asking for an internship via LinkedIn, and I got it because I asked for it. And then people said, well, this happened because you were lucky. And I would like just to go a bit deeper into that and tell me, what is your opinion on luck and those things that you attract towards you when you really kind of have some sort of I wouldn't say path that's already created, but when you know what you want, or you have some sort of goal that you really want to get to. Do you believe in that? Do you think it's something that we can train? Do you think it's something that people can listen to more to themselves and understand those relationships?
I am so glad you're asking this question. I hope that you can feel the joy of because it's, first of all, it's just a very nuanced thing that you've pointed to. And I can tell it's because you've also experienced that reflection from others. And I'm just going to cut straight to the chase is that no, I don't believe in luck. I believe in privilege for sure. Um, and I'm going to, I'm going to illustrate this by telling some more detail of my story of moving to New York City. I grew up in a very traumatic environment. I had a very horrific childhood, and um, music was saved my life. So that's an important thing to know. When I moved away to college, I worked for a year in order to not pay out-of-state tuition. And then because of merit, because I worked really hard, I got almost full scholarships to pay for school. But I could hardly afford to feed myself. And during the time that I was in college, I accrued a lot of debt because as an American, when you turn 18 years old, credit card companies send you credit cards in the mail. And all you have to do is dial a 1-800 number and you have free money. And that happens when you're 18. And when I was 18, I was not responsible with money. And so I found myself at 22 years old when I moved to New York City with terrible credit. And when I say terrible credit, the consequences of having terrible credit are that you can't sign a lease on an apartment and no banks will open an account with you. And in my case, because I had bounced so many checks trying to feed myself up until this point in my life, my bank in Seattle, where I had moved from, had closed my account and I had a warning, and there were certain checks and balances I had to go to in order to be worthy of a bank account. And so here I was getting a job in an investment bank. First of all, I had to find an apartment who would take me that I didn't need to be on the lease for, because so sure, it was lucky, but I had to actually bounce around to subletted apartments for 6 months before I had established some clout in New York City so that I could be on a lease, and I had to only be on a lease with someone else. And then I got a job at a bank, and the bank needed to do direct deposit in order to pay me, and I couldn't find a bank to open a bank account with me so that I could receive my paycheck. So those are the extra stories that make it really clear that I wasn't necessarily lucky, though I will say I was privileged to be a white woman. And, you know, we're in this time now where, like, if I had been a Black woman, I might not have successfully eventually managed to convince a bank to open an account for me, because I had a track record of being really responsible with money. And then here I was getting a job in investment banking, which was just so ironic. But I worked really, really hard. And one of the things that is extremely important to convey here is that when I made this decision, I had no idea how it was going to work out. I very much was guided by my gut that I was supposed to be there, and I didn't have a plan B. And I think often, and this has been true of every large leap that I've made in my life. I didn't have a plan B when I moved to Denmark either. I just was like, I'm gonna get a job. I'm hireable. There's no way they can say no, you know? And of course I had other people who said no to me. I think I must have applied for 50 jobs at Maersk, and they said no to every single one of them. You know, like, it's just, but I walked in the door of Nordea, and my future boss knew immediately that he was going to hire me, and he told me that later, but it was also the exact right job for my skill set. So
definitely, yeah.
I don't want to underplay that I have worked my butt off to get where I am. And there are, of course, privileges, and the added aspect of it is the thing that had it be that I changed careers, is that while I wasn't aware of it at the time, one of the reasons why I have been afforded these privileges is because I'm easy to trust. And partly I'm easy to trust because of my emotional intelligence and my transparency.
Exactly. Yes.
Who I am. And so I talk a little bit about this in my TED Talk, so I think you'll put that in the show notes so that people can refer to it. But if you're saying something and your body is transmitting something else, it creates cognitive dissonance for the listener. And it makes it difficult for people to inherently trust you, to be able to just say, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And so if you have a bunch of unresolved material inside of yourself that has it be that your body is transmitting angst and fear, even though you're using really correct language, that will impact your result. And that's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do now, is because, of course, I went through a ton of review of why it was that I managed to get as far as I did in my life and how I continue to move at the speed that I do. And a lot of it is because of that, is because I've always been very transparent with where I'm at, and in that sense, very integrous. Like I'm in full integrity. I was a hot mess, but I wasn't a liar about being a hot mess. I was just like, I'm 22, I'm still figuring it out. You know, I wasn't pretending to be something I wasn't. And I think, you know, we kind of alluded to this at the beginning also, is that, you know, especially in Europe, you start a career path and you're very much like influxed with a lot of, this is what it's supposed to be like, and here's what you can expect. And there's no point at which someone says, hang on, let's have a moment of self-reflection Does this feel resonant for you? Is this in alignment with what you want? How could you potentially see this look? And so we don't learn how to question our internal.
When you listen to people that you can feel they're not really happy with their setup, um, what do you do? Do you say something? Do you have this, and maybe with your clients, maybe that's more relevant. Where do you start from when you see that people are not necessarily happy with their current setup?
Well, and I've learned this by really messing it up. But I don't tend to dive right into there's that thing that's off about what you just said, because I find that that elicits a lot of a defensive response of like, you know, I didn't give you consent to read my heart.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and true, you know, totally true. And if we were in my house and it was they were paying me to do that work, then I might dive in. You know, I just with the call that I was on before this one, I was on a call with the client and I asked him straight out, like, are you doing professionally what it is that you feel like you want to do? And he spent probably 2 minutes in silence thinking about the answer to that question, because he knew that I wasn't asking it on accident. Like it wasn't just a casual conversation. Um, I don't, it's important to understand that there is intention behind every single action that we take. And we serve ourselves really well to question the assumptions that we have made in our lives about why we do what we do. And the reason it's important to do is because, and this was one of the things that I personally experienced, and I experienced it with a lot of people who happen to be in the corporate world. And it doesn't mean that it's rife in the corporate world. It just means that there's a collection of people who have this experience there, is that, you know, we never asked the question. We never considered whether we might go somewhere else. And in many ways, there's a lot of people with a lot of power who work in that environment who feel really empty. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that they can sense that there's this more available somewhere inside of themselves, but they don't know how to access it. They don't know what it is. It feels a little scary because, of course, the choice to work in a specific field, in a specific industry with a specific career path has us feel really safe. And so if we feel haunted by this unknown aspect, it can feel really disturbing. And that was certainly what I experienced, and partly what put me on what you alluded to earlier, which was my sort of 3-year transformational and transition journey into starting my own company, is that I had that moment where here I was, so privileged to have a high salary in one of the best countries on earth. I mean, like I had a lot of privilege. I was traveling the world. I was eating at all the fine dining restaurants. I had kind friends. I had friends who came to Denmark to visit me, and I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. Like I didn't feel like I was being fully used in my life. Like there were parts of my expression that weren't making it out. And that, I find that to be really, really common for specific age brackets, but it's also just kind of gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse the older you get, if you've chosen a career path that's not right for you. And for me, I chose a career path that was wonderful. I loved working in banking. I loved what I did in many, many ways, but it was limiting. And I needed to do something that was bigger. And I think that it's really essential that we are willing to do the brave thing and the courageous thing of saying, what drove my intention to be here? Because I know for me, I came from a family that was so poorly put together that to have a stable career was a huge accomplishment, because I had a lifestyle. Both of my parents were emotionally repressed, and they struggled with vulnerability. That on the emotional side, that was really true, but on a financial and like have your stuff together as an adult side, like neither of them. were well put together. And so I thought, I'm going to correct this by working in an environment where I have my vacation days and I have my pension, and choosing a career where I had financial stability was actually an essential part of my growth. It wasn't even that I was necessarily escaping anything. I needed 12 years of security from the outside in order to gather myself from the first 22 years of my life of none. And in that way, I was beautifully served by the investment banking world and by the career that I had there on a very deeply emotional level, in
Mm-hmm.
addition to a professional level.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is sort of a long-winded way of saying is that I think it's really important to ask ourselves those questions and to be able to eventually listen to the response and start to move toward it. Because of course it was really confronting for me to realize that I didn't want to work in banking when I was well-fledged in a career with seniority and I had subordinates and I was training people and I was doing all sorts of cool stuff in banking, to have no clue what I was going to do at that point. It's not like I was like, oh, I'm going to be a coach like that. It
Mm-hmm.
did not come that
Tell,
quickly.
tell us a bit about that. So, when you felt, let's say, that you maybe are not on the right path, that the setup that you had was confining to a certain extent, probably it took you a while to decide, okay, this is it. I need to just shift from this industry to another one. How did you discover your new call, like your new calling, the next thing that you wanted to focus on?
So the time between me having the realization that I was very far off of my path and starting to feel like I was moving in a direction that was getting me somewhere toward my path already was a year.
Mm.
Because I didn't, it's like, how do you Google this? I was going through an existential crisis. I mean, like I had a full breakdown. Like it was dramatic, and I didn't know what to do about it. I had no idea who to talk to, where to reach out to. How do you Google what I was experiencing? I was experiencing things I didn't have words for. And so what I did was I bought plane tickets and I did a lot of traveling. Because I knew that when I was traveling, I at least felt like I was myself. And I felt like I had some kind of golden handcuffs on when I was at home. Like I didn't feel liberated at all. And then I started to notice aspects of myself that were true when I traveled that I kind of put in the armoire when I got home and didn't really follow, which was more of my spontaneity, more of my outgoing socially behavior. You know, Danes are really introverted, and I'd kind of get here and I would make plans all the time and never make eye contact with anybody on the street. And that's just really against my nature. Even though I'm an introvert, I am socially, like, I want to be connected to my environment. And so I made a commitment to start to change that behavior. And so the first thing I did was I made a manifesto for myself that I was going to go on walks instead of riding my bike everywhere. And I was going to stop making plans, which actually resulted in me losing some friends in Denmark because Danes are never available unless they have plans.
This is something that I experience, and I must say that I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I also make plans right now, and I really like the fact that I know what I'm going to do. But in the
Yeah.
same time, if I have an evening where I don't really do anything, I'm like, so what do I do now? Like, who can I call that might be available? But it is
Totally.
something that it's just a cultural trait of being
Yeah.
here.
Well, and I think that, you know, people are very deliberate about how they use their time here and
Exactly,
who they
exactly.
spend it with, which is something to learn from as well.
Yeah.
But I often felt like um, I missed the nuance of life by constantly not being available. And so I stopped making plans. And then I started meeting people who were into personal development. And that brought me into the personal development world. And incidentally, through my career development at Nordea, one of the next levels of education for me to get was coaching so that I could learn how to develop my team. And so in a personal development track that I was on, I enrolled in their coaching program.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do it because I wanted to become a coach, I did it because I wanted to learn how to better relate in intimacy, incidentally. Like I was in a relationship and I felt like I couldn't figure out how to make it work, even though we had really strong feelings for one another. And about 2 or 3 months into my coaching program, I realized I was very naturally good at it. I was just kind of like born a coach. And I had no idea that that was what I had been doing all the time. And so the program in itself effectively gave me permission to be this part of myself and to monetize on this part of myself that I didn't know was even a thing. I didn't know it was an industry. I didn't know it was a skill set. Like I was just doing it and it's something I'd just taken for granted about myself for a really long time. So that's what happened. And I got trained to be a coach. And of course, you know, you're not done learning when you finish your coaching certificate. And I had a lot of learning to do. And I knew I was going to leave banking by the time I finished my coaching certificate. So I got really, really clear, but I was also on a work visa in Denmark. And
Sure.
Nordea was my sponsor, which means that I couldn't just leave Nordea. I had to stay in order to stay in Denmark, and Denmark had become my home at that point. And so I had to be really smart about my transition. And so I changed jobs right after my coaching program was over and told my then boss, if I'm still here in a year and a half, we both failed. So it was a very brave move. And I said, here's what you can expect from me. And he hired me to grow his team and to build up the infrastructure of a management office and develop leaders. And that's what I did in a year and a half. And then I was gone. And I knew that that was the timeline I was on because that was when I was eligible for permanent residency in Denmark and could start my business. And I was saving every penny I had, and I was working nights and weekends. And at that point, I was already coaching. And then about 6 months after I got my coaching certificate, I launched an aspect of my company, which is Adventure Awake, and started taking coaching clients on intensives out in the world on my vacation days with Nordea.
But that's a great strategy. And I love the fact that you've mentioned also some of the, you know, the help that you got through the leaders in your life, because you could have had a manager who said, oh, well, if you don't want this. I mean, obviously, some of the things I'm discussing with guests and some of the things that I'm experiencing here in Denmark, we both know that these are aspects that might not replicate somewhere else. Like it is a privileged situation to be able to interact on a daily basis with leaders and with people with you know, higher education that really want, they see the better of the organization rather than a person. So I would like to go towards the idea of when you are in the setup where, you know, you have, or let's say when you don't necessarily have this situation with somebody that would help you mitigate the situation by saying, you know what, I'll help you transition. Even if those were not the words, you knew that this is the opportunity for you to transition. You had that setup. But what would you advise, what would you tell people about, you know, them feeling stuck or in a place where they know they also want to exit, or just not necessarily exit, but maybe move in a different direction, but they don't necessarily have this sponsorship, this support of, okay, I'll try to help you out. What can we all learn from one of those experiences? How can we go around them?
One of the things I want to say to this is there was something really, really essential in what was occurring for me during this time that directly impacted me having leaders who advocated for me. And that was that I invested in knowing who I was for 3 years before I had that conversation with that last leader at Nordea. And so I could sit down with him at a table and say, and this is something that, by the way, and this is a great topic for your audience and for women, is that women are very uncomfortable sitting down at a table and saying, here's what I want to be paid, here's what I'm going to do, here's what you can expect from me. We are very we're pleasing, we want to help, and we're more inclined to take less money to do more work so long as we're happy with our work environment. And I was aware of that at the time. And what is essential, no matter where you are in your life, whether you're working in the corporate world as an entrepreneur or you're staying home as a mother, is that you've done the dirty work, or the inner work, as we were talking about earlier, of knowing who you are, so that you can be really clear about what your needs are, so that you can perform or show up in a way in which you are in integrity and that other people are happy with. And so by the time I got to that conversation with this particular leader, I knew that, for example, one of my working styles is a sprinter. I am not a marathon runner. I'm not a marathon runner physically. I'm not a marathon runner intellectually either. I am a sprinter. And that metaphor is a really, really important thing to know about oneself, because what that means is I work really well in a project environment where I can go all in on something to get it done. And then I need some time for recovery, obviously. And then I want to do it again. And for me, in the professional landscape, like as an entrepreneur, my sprints usually last about 4 to 6 weeks now, because I'm doing everything. And I tend to have little sprints, and then sort of a longer sprint. But in the corporate world, sprinting looked more like a 12 to 14 month sprint, where you're building something collectively with a bunch of other people. You're on a mission. The rules are clear. What needs to be done is clear, and you're going. And I knew that about myself. And so when we sat down at the table, I could tell my future boss that, and it was right in line with him and what he wanted as well. He needed me to sprint. And then I knew that I was going to need recovery after that. And that's what I did. And so this is something that women tend to be really uncomfortable for. And if I implore anything out of the listeners in this conversation, it is to take the time to know exactly who you are and what it is that you need. Because when you're clear about what your needs are, it's kind to other people, and they want to meet your needs. Everyone wants to meet your needs. If you are unclear about what your needs are, you will never be satisfied. And that is essential work for women. And this is what I do with my private clients all the time. And it is challenging for all of them. And it was challenging for me. So it was a huge achievement to sit down with that boss and say, and I also I got a raise. I asked him for more money. I said, you have me. And on top of all of the things that you're hiring me for, I'm also going to build leaders on your team, and I'm going to be the mama bear and the glue, because at that point, I also knew that I had the emotional intelligence angle that he didn't. And so I could pick up the slack for him. And I ended up teaching him a lot in that year and a half that he didn't have, that ended up having him move into HR afterward, incidentally. So it was a really, really beneficial place, but it started with me being clear about what I needed. And I think that's really important lesson for any woman in her career, whether it's entrepreneurship, motherhood, being a wife, or corporate environment, or any of the other possible pictures of that.
I really like that. So know yourself, and, be prepared to share what you want, right? This is something that if you don't say it, people won't know it, and so on. But when it comes to just continuing on this path, when it comes to development, let's say that not everybody will want to be an entrepreneur like you became. What are your pieces of advice for aspiring leaders who understand that emotional intelligence is very important, and they maybe don't know how to use that yet in a professional environment?
I don't think that everyone's cut out to be an entrepreneur. It is a fallacy that it is the only place that you can go to be free. I don't encourage, I have a lot of clients who see my life, and they think that they want the same thing. And most people don't want my life. It's not set up for anybody else besides me. My life is custom made for me. It is entirely possible to be totally fulfilled doing anything, honestly. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to love the business, the art of running a business. You need to love it. You need to love that aspect in addition to the art that you're selling. And that's not for everybody. And if it's not for you, then it's up to you to find a job where you can be an employee at a company that's in line with your integrity. And I want to be super clear. I loved especially my last year and a half. My last sprint at Nordea was wonderful. I had amazing colleagues. We had such a good time together. I'm still connected to them. I didn't want to leave, but it was very similar to the pull that pulled me to New York City and the pull that pulled me to Europe. It was one of those, like, I had to go. I needed to move on. And I know for myself that I am supposed to serve more of the world than just the financial sector. And it felt, again, there's this pattern. I felt limited. I felt like I needed to get my voice out into a broader audience of people. And sure enough, that's what I've done. And so I was clear on that. If you're in different circumstances, I mean, I didn't have a partner, I didn't have children, I'm, not worried about my pension. I don't personally believe in the life motto of work until retirement and then you can live your life. Like I hope to be doing a thing that fulfills my heart until the day that I die. I don't think I need to retire from something. I also live a very retired life. I go to bed at 9:30 at night and I work in my garden a lot. So one could say that I'm already senile. But anyway, working on emotional intelligence skill can start really, really small. And it starts with listening. It starts with being curious. And if you have aspirations to be a leader in a corporate environment specifically, it's important to remember that being a leader is not being the best. It's not being the most shiny. It's not being the most visible. It's not knowing everything. That's a really, really important one. Being a leader is your capacity to develop other leaders. So I really challenge this notion of being a manager or being a boss. I think that it's just a terrible concept and language, and it's created several generations of people who don't know how to think for themselves. And companies now more than ever need innovation and they need creativity. And if you're a leader who is not cultivating that in your team because you're not willing to listen, you're not willing to ask questions, and you're not willing to not know, you won't grow. And so I say to my corporate clients, I have clients who work in the corporate realm, if you're doing something and you know what's happening, you're not growing. And so prioritizing growth means dancing on that razor's edge of constantly doing things that are unfamiliar to you. And that's challenging when you've picked a career where you have this expectation that your path is going to look a specific way, but it's essential. It's essential if you want your life and your career to feel as though it's moving and growing over the course of the next 30 some odd, 40 some odd years, depending on how long you intend to work. So that would be my suggestion, is to listen. It's to be humble. Humility is an excellent drug in a world where everyone thinks that they know everything. It's a really great way to be free from all the drama and to just be of service. And you can do that anywhere.
That's wonderful. I really like you have such a natural vibe. You can see that you've found your passion and that you obviously know your field so well, and working with people's energies and understanding, sensing the room and understanding how people might react or feel about certain things. I find that very, very interesting and also very revealing for those who listen and maybe have never thought about it. I would like to ask you to sum up with one idea that you found in your life to be a revelation, something that you discovered and you realized that, just knowing this piece of information can really change maybe the way you look at things or maybe the way you perceive things before knowing it.
Oh gosh, I had two that just came up as you asked that question. So I'm going to give two. I hope that's okay. The
Yes.
first is, you have the right to change your mind.
Yes.
And I don't think I need to say more about that. I think that people forget that a lot.
Yes.
The second which had a lot to do with the existential crisis that I went into, is then when you don't know what to do, everything is fair game. And it took me a really long time to understand that, because I thought that I needed to make the right choice. But when you can't discern between right or wrong, just take a step forward, like you don't have to know. And I personally live in a world now where I don't know most of the time. And it is incredibly freeing. And what results is that you can move out of these intellectual steps and move into the wisdom. And this is sort of where I get a little bit more woo-woo and spiritual, but like your heart knows. Everyone's heart knows what they're here to do. And the more we're willing to listen, and the more we're willing to not think we have it all figured out, the easier that message can come through. And we just have to create space for it. And so being willing to not know and being willing to forge onward anyway, even though it's terrifying, is a really, really important practice. And it's something that I
Hmm.
still practice. It's not something that you just like, you get it down and then you never have to look at it again. Like we're all beginners in this life. So yeah, I'm an expert, but I'm just a beginner expert.
I love it. And I really appreciate you sharing this with listeners that, for some of them, this might really be revealing about what's next for them. Because a lot of people, they look for inspiration, or, yeah, they listen to what's happening at a point sometimes in their lives where they feel, I'm I'm at a point in my life where I'm not sure what to do. So I'm gonna look out there and try to find out what's next. I'm trying to take some steps into hopefully the right direction. And I really love your last piece of info, the advice that you gave to just go with something, because it will come together. And I really feel that people should maybe worry less about whether that's the right decision, and try to leave it more and see what happens, because sometimes we cannot plan all of our dinners. Sometimes we just we must let it come at some point.
That's right. Absolutely.
Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you found this talk interesting, and stay tuned for more episodes to come with inspiring female role models.